to be a ballet dancer. A movie star. The boss. A fairy. I want to be Spider-Man, but first I have to get bitten by a redback there. Be a teacher. Builder. First I want to try out playing tennis. Crocodile. A vet. Be a hairdresser. I want to be a ninja.
What did you want to be when you grew up? Or what do you want to be when you grow up? Anybody? What were your ambitions? What? Alive? Good job. Anybody else? Oh, you even got the airline. She wanted to be a stewardess, and she even knew the airline. Okay. Anybody else? Broadway singer. What was it over here? Oh, okay. Yeah. Liz was what she wanted to be, and you said Broadway singer. Growing up listening to the music of the 80s, I at first wanted to be Michael Jackson. Yeah. It's called the moonwalk, Cheryl, by the way. But I got to be a teenager and realized that wasn't going to work out. So then I went to cop or judge. I wanted to be a cop or a judge. Kind of went back and forth between one of the two. Of course, now here I am doing this, and I can't imagine myself doing anything else. Although maybe a day or two I still want to be a judge. But mostly love what I do. It's interesting because I wonder if the way we talk about these things, especially as children, kind of conditions us to look at our lives through a telescope. Are we always looking for something in the future? Are we always looking ahead at something that's coming that is better than what we have now, that is more glorious, that will be happier? I have a feeling that the grass is usually not greener on the other side, or if it is, it still has to be mowed. Are we too often looking through a telescope? And by the way, it's possible to look through a telescope backwards too, not just forward. This is part 2 of a series I'm doing on calling, part 2 of 2. And this is what I showed you last week. I said that one way to think about our calling is that we're probably pretty close to it when we're doing something that's the intersection between what we love, what we're good at, and what serves others. But I don't think we can stop there because the analogy is not perfect, because I don't actually see calling as a spot per se. Particularly, I don't see it as a spot on our timeline where somewhere down the road we're going to realize our grand purpose in life. I'm not sure I see it that way. But, interestingly, a lot of the ways we talk, especially as children and with children, we're looking through that telescope far into the future, and when you're doing that, you can't see what's right around you and what's right close to you. Moses received his first revelation from God in that famous burning bush story. Moses is walking along, doing what he normally did. God interrupts him in what he is used to doing, which God does a lot. And he sees the burning bush and he goes over, starts talking to the bush, of course, and God is talking back. And it catches his attention because there's this great flame and it's not burning up. And he starts talking to God. And one of the first things God says to him after calling his name, and Moses says, "Here I am," God says, "Take off your sandals, for where you are standing is holy ground." Right where you are. Now, Moses was going to be called to lead the Israelites all the way out of Egypt, through the desert, through the promised land. But God stops him right there at the beginning and says, "Take off your shoes. Where you're standing right now, just because I'm here, is holy ground." In a way, God told Moses to look down at his dirty, muddy feet, right where he was standing. So you're not paying attention to right where you're standing if you're looking through the telescope. If you're looking far ahead into the future, at some purpose down the road, some calling that God has for you. Or if you're looking through the telescope backwards and saying, "What a grand time that was, I'd give anything to be back there." God said to Moses, to paraphrase, "Look down." Is our calling to be found right where we are and not just down the road? Don't we believe that God is always doing something in our lives? But many times, especially we Westerners, I think we're always getting to the next thing. I want to share some quotes with you from an author named Barbara Brown Taylor. She wrote a book called An Altar in the World. She writes, "Most of us move so quickly that our surroundings become no more than the blurred scenery we fly past on our way to somewhere else. We pay attention to the speedometer, the wristwatch, the cell phone, the list of things to do, all of which feed our illusion that life is manageable." Now, wait a minute. I want life to be manageable. And I want to know right where I'm going and that there's something glorious ahead for me in my future. Don't you? Because of the childhood thing and because of the telescope thing, we often think of our purpose or our calling, especially when we're young, as one particular job or in one particular place or with one particular person. The idea that God has one soulmate in mind for us, an idea that you can't find anywhere in the Bible. What if God is doing something right here and it's in the blurred scenery that we're going past too quickly to be able to see? Here's what she says next. One common problem for people who believe that God has one particular job in mind for them is that it is almost never the job they are presently doing. This means that those who are busiest trying to figure out God's purpose for their lives are often the least purposeful about the work they are already doing. They can look right through the people they work with, since those people are not players in the divine plan as they perceive it. If you are on your way somewhere and you're not there yet, anybody who's here is really kind of a distraction, right? Or perhaps somebody to get in your way. What if God's calling on our lives can be found right now? What if God's calling on our lives is fluid, not just one thing? There's a theologian by the last name of Henson, oddly enough. I don't think they're related, but who knows, who talks about this and talks about calling and says, God takes an initiative and we respond. And this is how all of life goes. God's initiative, our response. Sometimes we get it right, sometimes we get it wrong, but God always has a calling on our lives, and it always has something to do with right where we are. The story of Moses and the Israelites journeying through the wilderness. And interestingly enough, the people who had so desperately wanted to get out of Egypt were now grumbling against Moses and saying, we want to what? Go back. Because at least it was familiar there. Now they were thirsty. And they were about ready to stone Moses because what are you trying to do? Kill us? Why did you bring us out here into the desert? We were better off. Where are we going? And if they had been looking ahead to say, we're not going to do anything, get anywhere, we're not going to get water until we reach the promised land, despair would have set in. Right where they were, there was a rock. And all Moses had to do was tap into it. Strike the rock with his staff, God tells him to do. And there was the water that they wanted. Right where they were. Look down. We read the passage of Jesus calling his first disciples because he calls them on a journey and probably does one of the most frustrating things that God was fond of doing in the Old Testament as well. He didn't tell them where they were going. He just told them who they're going to be with. And he says, follow me, and I will make you a fisher of people. Which, in case you haven't noticed, is a hard job. When we were on vacation, we went up to a lake in New Hampshire, and the thing was, it had to be full of fish because my son would take a fishing rod and just a simple worm, throw it out there, and he would catch fish after fish after fish. They were just biting. This whole journey that God has us on of fishing for people is not as easy, not as methodical, but there are always people around us that we're going to miss if the divine plan is down the road and anybody here is just in our way. What if, my slides froze, what if calling is not just about what we do, but how we do all things? What if calling is not just what we do, but how we do all things? If you have a spouse, for example, I can tell you, it's okay, I don't have many left. If you have a spouse, I can tell you one of your callings without knowing anything else about you. It's the call to be a faithful, loving spouse. That's one of your callings. I can already tell you. If you have children, I can already tell you one of your callings without knowing anything else about you. If you have children, one of your callings is to be a loving, faithful, patient parent. Where are we right now? Don't we believe that the Spirit of God is everywhere? I had a conversation one time with a gentleman who was really struggling with what his calling was, what his purpose in life was. Found his life rather meaningless. He did. He felt it was meaningless. And we talked for a while, and at the end, he probably asked me something like, what do you think? What do you think my calling or my purpose is? And I said to him, well, I know of two. He said, really? And this guy had a wife and kids. So I said, there's two right there. Spouse, parent. And I won't try to interpret his facial expression, but I don't think he was expecting the response, because he might have been looking through the telescope. Look down. You know that picture of the sandals I had up there? dirty. You know? Look down, there's nothing pretty about that, right? Sometimes we look down, there's nothing pretty about where we are. Moses was just in a normal place, you know, deserty type landscape, walking through sand in his sandals, bush off to the side. And all of a sudden God says, you need to realize where you're standing right now is holy ground. God's calling in our lives, I believe, ebbs and flows through our circumstances, where we are, the people that are around us. I do not see it as just one thing. And mainly because all of these stories in the Bible are these people on this very uncertain journey with God. Have you figured life out yet? Do you have the answer to every question? We're on this, that person does. You're on this journey, this uncertain journey, and all through it, I believe God has a calling on our lives. Would you humor me for just a minute and close your eyes? And I want you to picture yourself looking through the telescope for a moment. What do you see? What do you see way back in your past or way into your future? What do you see when you're looking ahead or back? What did you hope for? What do you wish you had again? Where did you always dream you were going? Looking through the telescope. And then with your eyes still closed, imagine yourself putting away the telescope and looking down. What do you see when you look down? What do you see right where you are? What is there to be found in the dust of life right underneath your sandals? What might you miss if only looking through the telescope? My prayer is that God would keep our eyes open, keep our hearts and ears open. And by the way, one of my favorite verses is in Acts chapter 1. After Jesus has ascended back up into heaven, the disciples are standing here like this. And who knows how long they did that. And the story says an angel appears and says, it's one of my favorite verses in the Bible, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand there staring into the sky?" I love that verse. There's work to do. God has a calling right now if we just look down.